This is Kevin Lin from Illuminate LSAT, and let's continue with part 2 of a video on negation. We covered how to negate all, most, some, and none in part 1. Now let's talk about negating many, both, and or. On the LSAT, the word many means a large number. And the most important thing to recognize about many is that it is a little bit of a subjective amount. It doesn't necessarily mean at least one, so it doesn't mean exactly the same thing as some. And it doesn't necessarily mean over half, so it doesn't mean exactly the same thing as most. Many kind of falls into a category of its own. Now, most prep materials will tell you that you should treat many like the word some, and in the vast majority of circumstances, that's totally fine, and I personally will normally just treat the word many like a sum statement. But when it comes to negation, it is important to recognize that many excludes the possibility of just one. Many does have to be plural, and so you can think of many as maybe something like 2 and above, or maybe 3 and above. It's a little bit unclear, but many definitely does not mean 1, and it definitely does not mean 0. Let's take a look at this example. Many spies died to bring us this information. Now, this does not mean at least one spy died to bring us this information, and it doesn't mean most spies died to bring us this information. It means many. A lot of spies died to bring us this information. So if we wanted to negate this idea, it is not true that many spies died to bring us this information. Well, there's nothing fancy here. I just negate this as not many. Not many spies died to bring us this information. So I've written that negation below. Not many spies died to bring us this information. And the most important thing to me to notice is that the negation of many is different from the negation of some. The negation of some was none, but the negation of many should just be not many. Because maybe there's only one spy who died to bring us this information. That's still not many. You're still allowed to have a very small number of spies dying, and that would still contradict the claim that many spies died. Next up is how to negate both/and let's take a look at an example. Both athletes and lawyers will be attending the party. What does that mean? Of course, that means at the party you will see both athletes and lawyers. What does it mean for this to not be true? It is not the case that both athletes and lawyers will be attending the party. Well, that just means not both of athletes and lawyers will be attending the party. But the key is not both does not mean neither. So if your idea of negating this statement is none of them will be attending the party, that's actually not correct because you're missing a possibility. You're missing the possibility that just one of these groups will be attending the party. So let's try to visualize that idea. If we start off knowing that both athletes and lawyers are at the party, then really what that means is we are in the both category. Both of them are going to be at the party. So what does not both mean then? Well, not both means you're in the one or none category, or the none or one category. And that's why when I negate a both or and statement, I turn it into the idea of only one or none. So you can say that the negation is not both of athletes and lawyers will attend the party, but really what that means is only one of these groups or none of these groups will be attending the party. Now let's turn to how to negate the idea of or, and let's use this example. Today I will go to the gym or do laundry, something that many of us say but end up not actually following through on. What does it mean to say, today I will go to the gym or do laundry? That means today I will do at least one of these two things. I will go to the gym, or I'll do laundry, or I will do maybe even both. So if we want to negate this idea, what does it actually mean? It is not the case that today I will go to the gym or do laundry. Well, if I'm not going to go to the gym or do laundry, that means I'm doing none of them or neither of them. And let's visualize that idea over here. The initial statement, today I will go to the gym or do laundry, meant that I'm going to do one of these two activities or even both of these two activities. So if that's the realm of or, what does it mean to say we are not in that realm? Negating or. Well, that means we're in the none category. And that's why the negation of or is pretty simple. It just means neither or none. So those are the rules on how to negate quantified statements. Now let's take a look at how to negate conditional statements, and then we'll turn to how to negate everything else. So a conditional statement is a statement that says A is sufficient to guarantee B. If A is true, then that automatically means that B is true. Or in other words, whenever you have A, you always have B. So what does it mean to say that this is not true? That it is not the case that if you have A, then you have B? Well, that just means that A does not guarantee B anymore. You can have A while not having B. And that's the first way that you can think of negating a conditional statement. If the initial statement is A implies that B is true or A guarantees that B is true, the negation of that is, even if you have A, you might not have B. Let's apply that to an example here. If a passing ship sees us, we will be rescued. What does it mean to say that it is not true that if a passing ship sees us, we will be rescued? Well, that means that even if A, not B, or in other words, even if a passing ship sees us, we might not be rescued. Maybe they see us and they just don't want to rescue us and want us to starve. We have no idea. But the negation of this is they might see us and we still won't be rescued. Now, I want to note right now that there are some other ways to word the negation of a conditional statement, and I'll provide another one right here. Another way is to say A is possible even if you don't have B. That's essentially the same thing as even if A might not have B. It's just that this way of wording it sometimes makes more sense with certain conditional statements. For example, let's say we have this one: if a ninth grader makes the varsity team, they must be very skilled. So this sentence is asserting that if you have the ninth grader making the varsity team, that proves that they must be very skilled. Or in other words, being very skilled is necessary for a ninth grader to make the varsity team. If we're going to say that this statement is not true, what we're saying is it's possible for a ninth grader to make the varsity team, even if they are not very skilled. That's the same idea as using this construction. Even if a ninth grader makes the varsity team, they might not be very skilled. It's just that sometimes this way of wording it may make more sense to people. Now, the big takeaway from negating conditional statements is that you're always saying that the sufficient condition might be true, even though the necessary condition is not true. Affirm the sufficient condition and negate or deny the necessary condition. You do not negate a conditional statement by saying that B is possible even if you don't have A. This situation right here, which is a way of symbolizing that B is possible even though you don't have A, that is not a contradiction of this conditional statement, because the initial statement wasn't saying that B always guarantees A. The negation is always going to be this: A is possible even though you don't have B. Now let's talk about how to negate everything else. What if the statement we're trying to negate is not a quantified statement and is not a conditional statement? What do we do? Well, this should be pretty intuitive. We do this all the time. We basically add the negation, the word not, to the main verb of the sentence. Now, I don't want to get too grammatical on you, but it might help to introduce these ideas. Every sentence has a subject and a verb or a predicate verb, and the subject is the thing that is doing the verb, the thing that the verb is applying to, or sometimes I like to think of it as the subject is the thing that we are about to get a fact about. Let's take a look at this example. It says whales are fish, and of course you understand that the negation means whales are not fish, but let's understand mechanically how that works. Whales is the subject, are is the predicate verb, and to negate this type of sentence, all we do is we negate the predicate verb. That's why it becomes whales are not fish. Let's take a look at this next example. People who do not enjoy hitting balls with their head do not like volleyball. Now, one of the things the LSAT does to make things more difficult is they just have sentences where the subject is a very long phrase, where the subject includes modifiers, and those modifiers may themselves have verbs, but those verbs are not the predicate verb. Those are not the verb that the subject is doing. Those are not the verb that apply to the subject. In this case, the subject is people who do not enjoy hitting balls with their head. This entire idea is the subject. The predicate verb is do not like. This is the fact that we are getting about the subject They do not like volleyball. So to negate this sentence, we negate the predicate verb. People who do not enjoy hitting balls with their head do like volleyball. Sometimes students would look at a sentence like this and think that the negation should be people who do enjoy hitting balls with their head. But the issue is, if you're negating a sentence, you definitely do not touch anything in the subject. If you negate something in the subject, then you're changing the subject. We're no longer talking about the same thing. When you negate a sentence, you have to keep the subject untouched, and you negate the predicate verb instead. So let's put it all together and practice what we've learned. If you want to try these on your own, just go ahead and pause and then resume. The first statement is, every person who found a golden ticket was admitted to the ranch sauce factory. What does it mean to say that this is not true? It is not true that every person who found a golden ticket was admitted to the ranch sauce factory. Well, every is like the word all, and so we can negate this by saying some people who found a golden ticket were not admitted to the ranch sauce factory. Another way to put that is not every person or not all people who found a golden ticket were admitted to the ranch sauce factory. They're not going to experience the splendors of ranch. Let's take a look at number 2. Some of the paintings in the museum, so in other words, at least one of the paintings in the museum, does not look like it was painted by an adult. Because this statement is quantified by some, to negate some, we just turn the sum into none. No paintings in the museum do not look like they were painted by an adult. And here's what the negation looks like. I've scribbled out the sum and put a no, but of course, no paintings in the museum do not look like they were painted by an adult is a little bit hard to understand. That's because of the double negative, no and do not. And when you have that double negative, you can actually just cancel it out. So this actually means the paintings in the museum look like they were painted by an adult. All paintings in the museum look like they were painted by an adult is the same thing as no paintings in the museum do not look like they were painted by an adult. And I've written both versions of the negation down here. Of course, this bottom one is probably easier to understand. So just to recap, how did we get here? We turned the sum into no. That's how we got the first version of the negation. And then we apply the double negative here. We cancel out this no with this not, and it becomes all paintings in museum do look like they were made by an adult. Number 3 says, only students who have prior experience dissecting cadavers will be considered for the job. So what this means is the only kind of people out there who will be considered for the job must have prior experience dissecting cadavers. If we're saying this is not true, one way to do it is to say, not only these students will be considered for the job. Or in other words, there will be other students besides these who will also be considered for the job. Now, if that did not come to you intuitively, if you instead mistakenly negated this as only students who have prior experience dissecting cadavers will not be considered for the job, if that's how you thought of the negation, then mechanically this is what's going on. So here I've diagrammed what this sentence means because it is a conditional statement. When you have the word only, it introduces the necessary condition. So if you are considered for the job, then you must have prior experience. And the way to negate a conditional statement like this is to say that the sufficient condition is possible even if you don't have the necessary. So you can be considered for the job even if you do not have prior experience. Or in other words, there will be people considered for the job who do not have prior experience. So one takeaway from this example is when you have a sentence beginning with the word only, one way to negate it is to say not only. Not only those students, there are other students who will be considered. Here's one more set to practice on. If you want to try it on your own, go ahead and pause and then resume. Number 4 says if most of the students fail to turn in their homework on time, the whole class will be required to write an essay explaining the importance of doing homework on time and to perform community service. So if most students fail to turn in their homework on time, the whole class will be required to do 2 things: write the essay and perform community service. What does it mean to say that this is not true? Well, that means even if most of the students fail to turn in their homework on time, the whole class will not be required to do both of these things. In other words, even if most of them don't turn in their homework on time, the class might only be required to do one of these two things or none of these two things. Maybe they're not going to be required to write the essay and not required to perform community service, or they might just be required to do one and not required to do the other. And if you want to see how we got to that negation, here I've diagrammed the initial sentence here in its non-negated form. If most fail, then you have to do both of these things. And to negate a conditional statement, you say that the sufficient condition can be true, so even if most fail, but the necessary condition might not be true. And here we have to interpret not both write essay and community service. And so not both means only one or none. Even if most students don't turn in their homework on time, only one of these are going to be required, or maybe even none of them are required. Number 5 says a movie studio cannot maximize its profits unless at least some of its films develop a mass audience. Now, the negation of this one is a movie studio can maximize its profits even if none of its films develop a mass audience. Now, I know that that's probably not an intuitive understanding for many students, so I want to walk through the steps that we can take to understand how to negate number 5. So let's start by understanding what this sentence actually means, and it is a conditional statement, so we can follow the rules of unless. And one thing you can do with unless is you can turn it into if not, or in other words, you can think of it as introducing the sufficient condition but negate it. If not some of its films develop a mass audience, if not some develop a mass audience, then a movie studio cannot maximize its profits. But over here, not some requires us to understand what that means. Not some means none. So in other words, if none of the films develop a mass audience, and you can see I've changed that over here. So if not at least some develop a mass audience is the same as if none develop a mass audience, then it will not maximize profits. That's what this sentence means. Now, to negate a conditional statement like this, we say that the sufficient condition, the left side, can be true even though the right side is not true. So even if none develop a mass audience, it can still maximize its profit. There you see I've written that negation out. So remember, when I was negating this, I initially said a movie studio can maximize its profits even if none of its films develop a mass audience. That's exactly over here. It's switched in order, but it doesn't matter. You can always say it can maximize profits even if not mass audience, or you can say even if not mass audience can develop max profit. Those mean the same thing. I hope this lesson on negation was helpful for you. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments about anything in this video or anything related to the LSAT, and please like and subscribe for more free LSAT content every week.